नमस्ते एंड वेलकम टू द स्केप्टिक शो। आज के इस एपिसोड में हम बात करने वाले हैं हिंदुइज्म पे एंड टू टॉक अबाउट हिंदुइज्म आई हैव एन एक्सपर्ट हियर। आई हैव भार्गव जोशी। इफ यू डोंट नो एंड इफ यू हैव नॉट लिसन टू द previous episode, then Bhargav Joshi, let me introduce Bhargav Joshi. Bhargav Joshi is a teaching assistant at University of California. इनके पास एक YouTube पेज है, एक YouTube चैनल है और एक Instagram पेज है जहाँ पे ये वेल रिसर्च इंफॉर्मेशन हिंदुइज्म एंड अदर धार्मिक रिलीजन के बारे में ये डालते हैं। एंड ये बहुत ही ज़्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है क्योंकि आज हमारे पास इंस्टाग्राम पे बहुत सारे पेज है जहाँ पे बहुत ज़्यादा फेक इंफॉर्मेशन रिलीजन के बारे में, स्पेशली हिंदुइज्म के बारे में फैलाया जा रहा है। सो इनके पास एक बहुत ही बढ़िया पेज है, प्रोजेक्ट सत्यलोक। अगर आपको हिंदुइज्म के बारे में या फिर वैदिक गॉड्स के बारे में या फिर बुद्धिज्म, सिखिज्म, इन सभी के बारे में पढ़ना है तो प्लीज़ गो एंड चेक दैट आउट। एंड वेलकम बैक टू द शो।
Yeah, thank you for having me.
वेल आज हम अपना पहला एपिसोड कंटिन्यू करने वाले हैं। पहले एपिसोड में हमने वैदिक रिलीजन के बारे में बात करा था एंड उसी में हमने प्लान करा था दोनों वैदिक रिलीजन और फिर हिंदुइज्म को अच्छे से डिस्कस करने का, बट देन वी गॉट कैरिड अवे और हम 1 घंटे 10 मिनट तक सिर्फ वेदास पे ही बात करते रह गए। सो मैं अब स्टार्ट करूंगा एंड पहला क्वेश्चन बहुत ही बेसिक है, बट इस क्वेश्चन के आंसर पे कहीं पर भी कोई एग्रीमेंट नहीं है। So, what is Hinduism? Is it a way of life or a religion? Or is it a religion which is the byproduct of way of life? Or is it a commonwealth of a group of religion which have some common belief? What is Hinduism?
Well, that's a good question. The term Hinduism was given to this particular set of beliefs by the British colonizers. So that's where the term Hinduism comes from. But if you try to take a look, so these are two different questions. What is Hinduism and is it a religion? These are two different questions. The traditions that we follow today in the name of Hinduism, like we have the Vedic, Vedantic, Upanishadic, Puranic, Tantric, all kinds of system, Bhakti movement, all of these come under Hinduism. The nomenclature or the term is given to us, it is an exonym, you can say. But still, it is a religion. So if you try to take a look at the definitions of religion, academic definitions of religion, then Hinduism does fit into all of them. Well, not all of them, most of them. So it is definitely a religion. You can call it a way of life, but essentially every religion is a way of life.
Yeah.
So if you take a look at Taoism, which is the ancient, you could say, Asian indigenous religion, Taoism itself means the way of Tao, and Tao is everything. Tao or Tao, it's everything. So even that becomes a way of life. If you talk about Shintoism, which is another Asian indigenous religion, that is again the way of the Shinto. Shinto are the kami. Similarly, Hinduism can also be a way of life, but it is still a religion because it has codified principles. It has the Vedas, which are considered internally as infallible. So Vedas are the Shruti or the Apaurushaya, as the Purva Mimamsa tradition calls it that. So that's why it is a religion. It has some core principles. It builds on that. So it is definitely a religion which has deities. It has belief on a deity, a particular set of deities. It has Henotheism, Monotheism, monism, dualism, you might call it that, all sorts of things. But still, it is a religion. So yes, there is something called as Hinduism. Although I would not call it Hinduism, internally, the people of this faith call it as Sanatan Dharma. So Sanatan is eternal, and Dharma is basically, you cannot really have a positive definition for the word Dharma. And
Yeah.
this is where people go wrong. They try to define what Dharma is. The thing is, in Jainism, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Sikhism, Dharma has different meanings. It's not the same meaning which is there in Hinduism. Jainism and Buddhism are you could say, a dichotomy from Vedic Hinduism. So dharma cannot be defined positively. There are two types of definitions. There's apophatic definition and then there's cataphatic definition. Apophatic definition is when you can define something with fixed attributes. Like for example, when you ask someone, um, I don't know, what is mass? The immediate answer is the quantity of substance or the amount of matter in a substance is the mass. So this is a positive definition. The other type of definition is called a cataphoric definition, which means you can only define dharma as dharma is not this, is not this, is not this, is not this. Whatever remains, that is dharma. So
So
that's what
basically,
people,
neti neti.
yeah, exactly. So you can only define what it is not, and thus by doing that, you define what it is. It is an indirect definition. So, yes, I would say Hinduism is a religion, but the term is given to us after the British colonizers. They started studying our texts. The Orientalists started studying it academically, and that's when they created this term. And it comes from very basic, for example, the religion of Judea is Judaism. So the religion of Hindus is Hinduism. That's how they used the logic. That's it. But it is
Right.
definitely a religion. It is a way of life, but it is a religion because it fits into the template of every religion, not just Abrahamic religion.
Yeah. एंड द डिस्क्रिप्शन ऑफ धर्म या फिर धर्म का जो मीनिंग होता है वो भी डिपेंडिंग ऑन टेक्स्ट बहुत ज़्यादा चेंज हो जाता है। मनुस्मृति में धर्म का मतलब कुछ अलग है, एंड देन गीता में कुछ अलग है। सो ये टेक्स्ट पे भी डिपेंड करता है। सो माय नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन इज मॉडर्न हिंदुइज्म, हिंदुइज्म एज वी नो इट, क्योंकि वैदिक रिलीजन में तो यज्ञ किया जाता था, बट आज के मॉडर्न हिंदुइज्म में टेम्पल्स पे फोकस्ड रहता है, आइडल्स पे फोकस रहता है। पहले आइडल वर्शिप वैदिक रिलीजन में नहीं होता था। तो ये जो मॉडर्न हिंदुइज्म है एज वी नो इट, इसका रूट कहाँ पर है? ये कब स्टार्ट हुआ? कब प्रॉपर्ली एक स्ट्रक्चर में आ गया कि अब टेम्पल्स पे पूजा की जाएगी?
Okay, that's a very good question. So it is not just about idolatry, which is the worship of idols. It is also about iconolatry, which is the worship of icons. So let's try to understand the difference first so that we can understand what exactly was followed in Vedic religion. Because when you make a statement like this, not you in particular, when a statement like this is made, that Vedas did not have idol worship, then many of the people are going to be very furious that what are you talking about? They were clearly worshipped idols. But that's the difference. They did not really worship an idol or an icon. But for that, we need to understand what idolatry and iconolatry is. So, idolatry is something where you worship the idol itself as the god. Like, for example, in Tirupati Balaji or Jagannath Puri, where they sincerely believe that the idol itself is God. The stone idol is the god. That's idolatry. And in that case, the deity has fixed attributes. So when you talk about it, idol needs to have fixed attributes because it is, a structure, a kind of structure. And the belief that the idol is God is idolatry. So I'm worshiping the idol, not what it represents. I'm worshiping the idol itself. So that's idolatry. And then we have
ओके।
iconolatry. Iconolatry is worshiping an icon. So, for example, if I'm an idolater, I'm worshiping an idol. That's fine. If I'm an iconolater or I worship the icons, then I don't need an idol in front of me. All I can do is close my eyes and visualize an image. It could be an image of Shiva, it could be an image of Vishnu, and then I have a mantra. So if you're saying, which is called Namasmaran, so if you're doing Namasmaran, I just need an icon. I need to visualize an icon. So when I visualize, for example, if I ask you, I am visualizing someone who has water on the top of his head and moon on the top of his head and snake around his neck. Who am I referring to?
शिवा।
How do you know?
वेल बिकॉज आई हैव सीन द पिक्चर्स।
Exactly, exactly. The icon is fixed. So that's iconolatry. Every god has some fixed attribute. For example, when I'm trying to visualize Shiva, I can only imagine in this way because his attributes have been fixed. So this is iconolatry. I don't need an idol, but I can still worship the image. And Om itself is iconolatry. It is an icon. So this is what idolatry and iconolatry is. Now, if you think about it in these terms, Vedic religion had none of these because if I try to ask you, how do you define Agni? What will be your answer? Do you have any
वेल
standard set of pictures for Agni?
द फायर इमेज, बट अग्नि इज ऑल्सो कॉन्सियसनेस।
Exactly. So you see that in Vedic religion, the attributes were not fixed. There are different types of Agni. For example, one of the type of Agni is Agni Vaishwanara. That is the fire become the sun. So Vaishwanara, the man of the cosmos, you can call it the cosmic man. So when Agni is Vaishwanara, he watches over everything, Vaishwanara. He watches how your clan is proceeding and he takes care of your clan. He protects you from your enemies. So you see, Agni has clearly a different role when it becomes Vaishwanara. Whereas when it is the ritualistic fire, the Homa Agni or the Yajna Agni, then it is simply fire, ritualistic fire. So you see, Agni is definitely the word for fire, but ritualistic fire is a manifestation of the idea of Agni. So that is what the Vedic religion was about. It was about imagery and allegorical representations. It was never about idolatry and iconolatry. But in later era, for example, if you talk about it, if you cannot really pinpoint when it actually began, but you can confidently say that with the rise of the Puranic tradition and with the rise of the Agama Shastras, like the Tantric traditions, Vaishnavism, Shaivism, Shakta, that is where idolatry and iconolatry gained prominence. That is where it shifted from, you could say, the Advaita Dvaita philosophy of Upanishads towards idol worship and icon worship. So that is where it changed. So we cannot pinpoint that, but we can definitely say that with the rise of Agama Shastra and with the rise of Puranic traditions, that is when idolatry came into existence.
So roughly 2000 years ago.
Yeah, that should be it. That should be pretty good. An
Yeah.
estimate.
एंड ये जो त्रिमूर्ति हैं जैसे कि ब्रह्मा, विष्णु एंड शिवा, इनका वर्शिप कब स्टार्ट हुआ? ये अग्नि, इंद्र, वरुण से एंड प्रजापति से शिफ्ट होकर के ये इन तीनों का और फिर देवी का पूजा ये कब स्टार्ट हुआ? डू वी हैव अ टाइमलाइन फॉर दैट?
Yes, so well, I cannot say a timeline, but we do see a gradual evolution. So in the Vedas, we do see that initially the Vedas are cathenotheistic. So what cathenotheistic means, it is not exactly polytheistic. Polytheistic would be the Greek religion. Greeks didn't have a religion, but the gods that they worshipped were polytheistic gods. So Helios had a structure, or Chronos had some physical attribute. So that is polytheism. But Vedas were not polytheistic, they were cathenotheistic, which means when you're worshipping one deity, you equally respect all other deities, but out of them, you're worshipping this one. You're not trying to denigrate the other deities. So that's cathenotheism, that all deities are accepted, but out of that, my choice is to worship this one. That's cathenotheism. And in corresponding verses or in subsequent verses, one deity becomes higher, one deity becomes lower. And we see these in many verses. Like, for example, in some sutta, um, I don't particularly remember the sutta, but in some of the verses, we see that Agni is actually dominant than Indra, while in the other verses, Indra is dominant. In some verses, Ushas is dominant. So
वेल
this
आई
is
वाज
one.
रीडिंग मार्कंडे पुराण एंड वहाँ पे स्टार्टिंग में ब्रह्मा इज द क्रिएटर एंड ही वाज
Yeah.
बोर्न आउट ऑफ द नेवल ऑफ विष्णु एंड देन थोड़े टाइम के बाद देवी इज द सुप्रीम वन
Mhm.
एंड देन उसके थोड़े थोड़े टाइम के बाद अग्नि इज द सुप्रीम गॉड
Exactly.
एंड उसके सिर्फ 5 पेज के बाद सूर्य इज द सुप्रीम गॉड.
Yeah, exactly. So this is exactly what is called cathenotheism, or you can say henotheism. So these
Okay,
are the
so
terms that
henotheism
define.
and catholicism are the same.
Yeah, henotheism and cathenotheism are all very similar. They have the same, you could say, they're synonymous.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's cathenotheism and henotheism. Later, as you see throughout the tradition, we see the rise of monotheism, where we have one single god called Prajapati or Vishwakarma, who is above all the gods and who is understood to be the architect. Now, many people will say that Vishwakarma is not the creator. Well, guess what? In the Vedas, he is the creator. That's why his name is Prajapati or Vishwakarma. People try to be anachronistic. They try to impose the Puranic structure on the Vedas. It should not be like that. It should be read in chronology. So in the Vedic texts, we do have a shift from cathenotheism to monotheism. And that monotheistic creator is Vishwakarma or Prajapati. So we see that the belief system itself is changing. Initially, it was henotheism. There was no supreme single creator. Now there is Prajapati. And slowly, as you move to the Brahmanas, Upanishads, and the Aranyakas, we see the rise of monism. So monism is basically Advaita. Brahman and Atman are one and the same. So that's in Upanishads. So there's no monotheism, there's no Henotheism, there's just monism. Brahman is equal to Atman. This one equation is, is the equation on which all the Upanishads expand on. And those are really good, and people should read them. And then we get to Puranas, where actually you can say that polytheism comes into existence because there's no Catholicism, there's polytheism. Like Vishnu has this attribute, Shiva has this attribute, Brahma has this attribute. These three form the creator, preserver, destroyer. So this trinity structure, triune structure, came into existence during the Puranas. It was not there earlier. So that is where we see the shift. So there's no timeline, but we can see the evolution of the faith from Catholicism to monotheism to monism to polytheism. And then again, during the time of Adi Shankara, Gaudapada, Ramanuja, they have taken back the Upanishads and started writing texts about it, the Brahma Sutras, the Brahma Bhashyas. So they're trying to revive the Upanishadic ideas of Brahman is equal to Atman, and then they have various philosophical expositions, like we have Advaita, Dvaita, Vashishtha Dvaita, Achintya Bheda Bheda. So all these are philosophical schools. They are extensions of the Astika school, but particularly focused on the last one, that is Vedanta or Uttara Mimamsa. But if you consider, it splits into two things. So we have Vedas, then we have Upanishads, and then it goes to Astika school. You could say takes a lower path, the six Astika schools, and an extension into Vedantic schools. And the upper path is Puranas, and then Tantric systems, and all that stuff. So there's a dichotomy, and we see polytheism in Puranas. So that's where it comes
Okay.
from.
I thought that Vedas and Vedic people were polytheistic, but okay. And
Yeah, yeah, that's the confusion. That's you could say, you could call them polytheists, but when you speak in academic terms, you have to make the distinction, and this makes it quite clear that they are cathenotheistic, not polytheistic.
okay. And is there a difference between the idea of Ishwar and Brahman?
Very good question. How best to explain it? So, Brahman, if you take the definition given by Adi Shankara, he defines Brahman as Sat Chit Ananda. So Sat is pure being, Chitta is pure consciousness, and Ananda is pure bliss. So that is what Brahman is. And if you read Upanishads, they keep on providing one poem after the other, allegorical representation, all kinds of vivid imagery about what Brahman is. So Brahman is something that is ultimate, immutable reality. That's Brahman, according to the Upanishads. That's the never changing truth. Atmana is the same thing, but it is still a manifestation in Prakriti. So they are the same thing. Atmana is Brahmana, but we have to realize that. And once you realize that, you become one with Brahman. You attain that state. And that is when you have gained moksha. So Brahman is really an ontological, soteriological, and eschatological concept, a conglomeration of these three. That's Brahman.
Okay.
Ishvara, on the other hand, it is very similar to the monotheistic creator from the Abrahamic religion. Ishvara is the cause of all the creation, and that's what Ishvara is according to the later traditions. We have Ishopanishad, where Ishvara is the idea of Ishvara is brought into question. Not question, it is introduced rather. So Ishvara would be very similar to a monotheistic creator. He has an attribute, and that is to create something. But Brahman is totally without attributes. Brahman is a stage, and Ishvara is actually a being who creates something. So that is the difference.
ओके एंड ये जो ईश्वर और ब्रह्मन है वो हमारे रियलिटी में ही रहते हैं या फिर हमारे रियलिटी हमारे यूनिवर्स से बाहर हैं?
Oh, why, yeah. So Brahman is definitely not a part of. So Brahman is the cause of creation, but it is existing with the creation. It's not external to creation.
Okay.
So that's Brahman. That's basically what Advaita means. Cause and
Okay.
effect are together. They are not separate. There's no one following the other. It's
Yeah,
cause and effect live together.
non-duality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's Advaita. So Brahman is not related to the material world, but the material world is a manifestation of the Brahman. So that's what the Brahman is. And so in the Vedantic theory, there's no universe as we know it today. It's just existence, reality is what they call it. And this
Okay.
reality, um, so this reality is veiled by Maya, the illusion. And Brahman is external to that illusion. So in order to realize Brahman, we have to get rid of avidya. Avidya is ignorance, the ignorance which results from we being cluttered in Maya. So when we evolve above this Maya, we get rid of the avidya, that is ignorance about the world. That is when we realize the Brahman, the absolute, the unchanging, immutable reality. That's Brahman. So he is attached to the universe, but he is distinct from the physical attributes. So
Okay.
that's very complex to imagine, but it is very philosophical and soteriological. So that's Brahman. And Ishvara is very similar to the idea of Purusha. So what the Upanishads say, for example, there is a very good verse in Chandogya, and it says that initially there was neither existence nor non-existence. That's the state of Purusha. He has cognition, but he's not aware of who he is. So he manifests into Prakriti. And when he manifests into Prakriti, that is when the Atmana comes into existence. And by realizing Atmana, he realizes his own being, Brahmana. So all of this reality is nothing but the Purusha trying to realize, trying to be conscious of what he is. That's all what this journey is. It is very similar to what Carl Sagan says: we are the way for the cosmos to know itself. That's
Okay.
exactly what the Brahman idea is. And Ishvara would then be kind of philosophically inferior because it brings into the discussion the idea of monotheism and the creation being an effect of the cause, which is Ishvara. So the basic difference is Ishvara is a monotheistic creator, very similar to a monotheistic creator, and Brahman is a stage of unchanging, immutable truth. And this is related, Brahman is related to the universe. It is a part of the universe, but it is distinct from the material creation or the Prakriti. While Ishvara is completely external to it. Ishvara is
Okay.
external to the universe. And Ishvara is usually an epithet for Lord Shiva. Isha Vara.
Yeah.
So that's an epithet for Shiva, usually widely accepted. But you can also interpret that as a monotheistic creator, because that is what the function of Ishvara is, to create.
Okay. ये थोड़ा सा कॉम्प्लेक्स था, समझने में थोड़ा टाइम लगेगा.
It's way more complex than that because there are Sanskrit terms in it which have
Yeah.
definite meanings. Yeah.
Yeah, the concept of sat and asat, existence and
Mhm.
non-existence, well, वो काफ़ी डिफिकल्ट है समझने में. But
Exactly.
what is the difference between the core belief of modern Hinduism and Vedic religion? क्योंकि एक टेम्पल हो गया, एक आइडल वर्शिप हो गया, एंड उधर यज्ञ होता था. What are
Mhm.
the other differences between the two?
Okay. So basically, you might be knowing that there are three marga or paths of gaining moksha. So the first one is karma kanda, which is the path of the Vedic religion, performing sacrifice. So the reason is it's not really inferior to it. So Vedic religion believes that by performing rituals in exact quantity, in exact manner, you can actually get the required result that you want in your life. But that was never about attaining liberation or moksha or salvation. It was very primitive. It was related to the people and their needs. So if you perform a sacrifice in this exact manner by performing this exact ritual in the with the incantations, the mantras, and if you pronounce them correctly, then they will give you the desired result, whatever you want. So that's basically the concept of karma kanda. Then we move to the concept of bhakti marga. So bhakti actually evolves during the Puranic tradition. The rise of bhakti movement that started in South India, and then it went all over India. So that's the rise of bhakti movement, and that is more prominent in the Vaishnavism, Shaivism, and Shaktism, and the Agama Shastras and the Puranic tradition. So that's bhakti marga, and the third one is called Jnana marga. So the way of knowledge or the path of knowledge. That is also one of the path to gain moksha. Now, the difference between the three is in the Vedic tradition, you only have karma kanda, the path of karma, performing
Yeah.
sacrifice, rituals. Then you have Upanishad, where you have the path of knowledge, jnana marga, has been explored. It is all about knowledge in the Upanishads. In fact, Brihadaranyaka, or is it Kathopanishad? I guess it's Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. So in that Upanishads, they emphatically say that may gods forsake the person who sees the Brahman in anything else other than his self. So which means there are no Vedas that, I mean, if you believe that Brahman is in Vedas, or Brahman is in gods, or Brahman is in the whole, then you're committing a mistake. And may all of these forsake you. So Brahman is not something external. Brahman is you. You are the Brahman. So that is
Okay.
soteriology and eschatology. And that is there in the Upanishads. So they are exploring Jnana Marga. And then we get to Ramayana and Mahabharata, where we have Bhagavad Gita, which is again, it is actually technically not an Upanishad, but it follows the same exact structure of an Upanishad. There's one person trying to tell someone other about what the Brahman is, which is exactly
Hmm.
what the case is in the Upanishads.
Yeah.
Upanishad literally means sitting with someone. That is what is happening with Arjuna and Krishna. So in the Bhagavad Gita, the third marga is explored, that is Bhakti marga. So that is the difference between the modern Hinduism, which completely relies on bhakti and karma kanda, and the people have totally abandoned the jnana marga, and all of them just worship. I'm not saying about the philosophers in Hinduism. I'm saying about the common people today who
Yeah.
follow Hinduism. They go to the temples, they worship idols. So that's completely bhakti marga. And then at home, they perform various rituals. So that's Vedic sacrifices, Vedic rituals. So for now, modern Hinduism is completely dependent on bhakti and karma, and nobody tries to explore the jnana marga anymore. Nobody tries to meditate. Nobody tries to, do dhyana and then try to explore this Brahman Atman relationship. So that's the difference between modern Hinduism and Upanishads and the Vedas.
ओके एंड वो त्रिमूर्ति वाली बात, त्रिमूर्ति की पूजा कब स्टार्ट हुई?
Oh, I guess so. Trimurti, that started with the rise of Vaishnavism and Shaivism. Because for Vaishnavism, Vishnu is the ultimate god. For Shaivism, Shiva is the ultimate god. So maybe that is when it started. It's very difficult to pinpoint that. But that's definitely the rise of these two deities as the prominent deities. Vaishnavism essentially is dependent on bhakti, and we see that Ramanuja or Vallabhacharya, all the other people were actually Vaishnav. They were Vaishnavas. They were worshippers of Vishnu. But it is essentially based on bhakti. And so that is when maybe they started worshipping the idols and the icons and all that stuff. But if you try to take a look at it, the Vedic rituals in marriage or in the threading ceremony. Just a minute. Okay. Yes. So if you try to take a look at the Vedic rituals in that case, you see that in the marriage rituals or in the threading ceremony, there is no idol. It's just a yajna at the center, and there are certain other constituents or ingredients. But there is no idol. There's no idol in marriage ceremony. Have you ever seen an idol or an icon or a photo?
No.
Never. It's just symbols. It's yajna. It's kunda, the central mandala. That's all it is. So you see, there are no idols, there are no icons, and that is the Vedic rituals. And then we have Satyanarayana puja. I'm not sure if you have heard of that.
या
Uh,
बिहार
yeah,
में बहुत कॉमन है.
exactly. Yeah. So Satyanarayana puja is where you definitely have an idol, and that is Vishnu. That puja itself is related to Satyanarayana. So that is where they have combined the Vedic rituals with the idea of bhakti, and you get the puja of Satyanarayana. So
Okay.
that's how it has evolved. So definitely with the rise of Vaishnavism and Shaivism, we see an increase in the idolatry and iconolatry. It's not there early, in the early texts or in the earlier era, but it is definitely there with the rise of Vaishnavism and Shaivism. So maybe that is when it began.
Hmm. And one question that I have about reading the text, how do you approach these text? क्योंकि अगर मुझे मार्कंडे पुराण पढ़ना है तो क्या मैं कोई क्वेश्चन को पहले सोच लूँ एंड देन उस बुक को पढूं, या फिर स्टार्टिंग से लेके फिनिश तक पढूं एंड देन वापस चेक करूं एंड देन पॉइंट्स नोट करूं?
Yeah, so that's a good way how to read the text. So let's say, for example, you're reading Upanishad. What you have to do is read the text, not the entire text. Try to go by the hints. So let's say you read the first sukta. Rigveda has sukta, and
Hmm.
Vedas have sukta. Upanishads are also written in a syntax, particular syntax. So let's say you read in the Chandogya Upanishad. If you want to talk about that, read one section. Try to understand what that section is trying to say. Let's say there's a story, and that story is trying to tell something. So it is not about the structure of the story. It is about what the story is trying to convey and how it relates to this Brahman is equal to Atman. So the way to study this academically is trying to understand what the text is saying, how the text is written, because whenever you try to take a look at all the ancient texts, they are always written in the form of a poem. So there's some kind of a scheme in there, some kind of a syntax, which they need to follow linguistically. So that's called prosody, by the way. So that's how it is written. So try to see that, try to see how they have formed the poem, what descriptions they are trying to give. So in the Upanishads, you are going to find many analogies, many metaphors to understand what Brahman is. So try to take a look at that and then move on to the next verse. Keep on doing the same thing, and then at the end, try to take an overall holistic idea of what the Upanishad was. So when you are done with reading the entire Chandogya Upanishads, try to recollect what all you have read and how it evolved from the first verse to the last verse. Because even in that, you'll realize that some of the ideas have evolved later. It is not just written by one person in one time period. These ideas have evolved over a period of time, and then they are compiled together as the Chandogya Upanishad. And same goes with every text. You take a look at every text, Mahabharata, Ramayana, Upanishad, the Ved, Brahmanas, Aranyaka, every text has evolved over time. There are additions, there are subtractions, not in the Vedas, but in the Upanishads for sure. You cannot add or subtract anything from Veda. They are infallible as per the internal belief. You cannot change them, you cannot alter them. They are supposed to be exactly in the way that they were since 1000 BCE, since the time of Guru, when they were textualized. But in later texts, you can definitely see this evolution. So that is how you should read it. Try to pursue it academically. If they're trying to focus on bhakti, try to see how they are trying to focus on bhakti. What exactly is bhakti? If they are trying to focus on jnana marga, try to see how they are trying to talk about jnana marga. How do you perceive moksha through jnana? So they talk about meditation, how to meditate, the breathing practices. They are not there in the Upanishads, they are there in the yoga school of philosophy. But still, try to see how they are creating ideas and building up on them in the subsequent sections. So that is how you should read it.
ओके। एंड अभी मैं कुछ टाइम पहले मार्कंडेय पुराण पढ़ रहा था, और ये सिर्फ मार्कंडेय पुराण में नहीं, ये रामायण में भी है, थोड़ा सा हरिवंश में भी काफ़ी है। इन सभी टेक्स्ट में वेदास को यूज़ किया जाता है कि ये वैलिडेट करने के लिए कि उस जो टेक्स्ट में लिखा हुआ है वो बिल्कुल सही है। इट इज़ इन कन्फर्मेटिव विद द वेदास। सो वेदास का, जबकि आज भी वेदास को हम समझते हैं कि इट इज़ द फाउंडेशन टेक्स्ट ऑफ हिंदुइज्म, बट रेयरली कोई हिंदू वेदास को पढ़ता होगा, रेयरली। आई डोंट नो एनीवन, मेरे घर में तो एटलीस्ट वेदास है भी नहीं। भागवत गीता का एक कॉपी है, बट वो भी कोई पढ़ा नहीं, बट नॉर्मली वेदास कोई नहीं पढ़ता। सो इस बुक का अभी भी इम्पोर्टेंस है, एंड पुरानिक लिटरेचर में इस बुक को यूज करके सब अपने आइडियाज को एक्सेप्टेंस दिलवा रहे हैं। सो वेदास पे इतना ज़्यादा फोकस क्यों है, जबकि अगर हमारा रिलीजन अगर इवॉल्व हो रहा है तो ये फोकस तो किसी और पे भी आ सकता था।
Yeah, that's a good question. So the thing is, the reason why it is considered like that is because the Vedas are the earliest compositions. That is where Hinduism as a religion originates. All the ideas that we know today, all the names of the gods, all the words that describe them, they originate from the Rig Veda and the subsequent Veda. So, if you consider Rigveda or the Ved itself, the four compositions written in the form of Samhitas, so the Ved were composed or they evolved from the Dhi. It is called a Dhi. So, Dhi is basically intuition of the Vedic poets. And I'm going to call them poets. Many people try like to call them sages, or they were poets. They were ingenious poets who composed these hymns. So it evolved from the dhi, that is the intuition. And then, when they had this intuition, they articulated that thought process in the form of words. So that requires some thinking. So I have a thought, but I need to put that thought into words such that the words are going to convey the entire meaning of that thought, which is very difficult, if you might have noticed. Putting your thought into words is very difficult to ensure that your words contain all the information that you thought of. There should be no transmission loss. So, this articulation came from the Manisha. That is what the Vedic poets call it. Manisha is the inspired thinking. So, they originate from the, that is intuition, and they are articulated by the Manisha or the inspired thinking. So these were fundamentally human compositions. You could call them revelations. So these are revelations, and in every religion, you cannot challenge a revelatory claim. Same goes with Buddha. You cannot say that, how do you know, Buddha, that all of this exists? Because Buddha had a revelation. You cannot challenge a revelatory claim internal to the religion, I'm saying. Obviously, if you're a skeptic, you can challenge that. Charvakas did that, Charvaka school. So they definitely challenged the Vedas. They criticized the Vedas heavily, and they were accepted. They were not killed, which is the difference between Abrahamic and Indian religions. So some sects definitely considered the Vedas as not infallible, and so they rejected the Vedas. Those were the Nastikas. The people who accepted the Vedas, they became Astikas. So everything that we know today is an extension of those Astika school. So that is why Vedas are considered to be foundational, because that is where the ideas originated. So they should be fixed. These are the Vedas are the foundation on which the
Mhm.
pillars of our religions are structured. So that is why they can never be changed. Just like, for example, in the Old Testament, you cannot change the Ten Commandments. You cannot alter the Ten Commandments. They are fixed. You can provide an interpretation of that, but you cannot change the source. That is exactly how it is today. So from Vedas, we have the Vedic texts, which are actually, you could say, the source. And then we have the Brahmanas. So the Brahmanas are the interpretations of Vedas, how you're supposed to understand the Vedas. That's Brahmanas. And after that, we have Aranyakas, where you're supposed to go into a forest if you're an ascetic or a monk. If when you're in the forest, that is when you should read these texts, the Aranyaka. And then we have the Upanishads, which are discussions. They come under discussions. So these are discussions of the ideas that are discussed in the Brahmanas. Brahmanas are the interpretations of the Vedas. So you see, there's a clear connection between the three. And from the Upanishads, then there is a dichotomy. We have all the six schools: Samkhya, Yoga, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, Nyaya, and then we have Vedanta. And Vedanta further has, the dichotomy: Advaita, Dvaita, Vishishtadvaita, Achintya Veda, Veda, and all that stuff. So all of this originates from the Veda. So if you change one thing, all the next things are going to change because they are completely and solely dependent on the Veda. That's where the ideas come from. So if you change something that is constant, everything else is going to change in accordance with it. So the thing is, if you change Veda today, you'll have to write all of these later texts again. So that is why
Okay.
Vedas can never be changed. They can never be challenged. I mean, you can challenge them, but then you are not an Astika. You're considered an Astika.
Okay.
So that is why Vedas are considered as foundational. and everything else builds up from them, and you could say they form the root of everything that we know about our culture, the Indic culture. So
Okay.
that is why they are infallible internally.
Okay, and in this case, by Vedas, you mean the Samhita part of the
Yeah,
Vedas.
yeah. That's the four, yeah, Samhitas.
ओके, क्योंकि वेद का तो एक संहिता पार्ट हो गया, देन फिर ब्राह्मणास एंड देन फिर अरण्यकास एंड देन फिर उपनिषद, बट इन दिस
Yeah,
केस यू मीन द संहिता पार्ट ओनली.
Samhitas. Yeah.
ओके, सो ये सभी कमेंट्री थी जो बाद में ऐड करी गई थी.
Exactly. So you see, the Samhitas are the core principles which were created by Vedic poets. And if you take a look at the Rig Veda, you see that it lists um, the family of poets before every hymn. It says who has composed these hymns, and these are the poets. And there are many poets all along the Rig Veda. Same goes with all the other Ved. And so all these later texts are interpretations or they are commentaries written on the Vedic literature. So that's what they are. But the Ved are the foundation, the Samhita are the foundation. And all the other things are interpretations or discussions of the ideas from the Ved.
एंड आज से 2-3 वीक पहले मुझे एक ऐसी इन्फॉर्मेशन के बारे में पता चला जिसके बाद आई वाज जस्ट ब्लोन आउट, क्योंकि मुझे लगता था कि हिंदुइज्म में गॉड्स ऐड करना ये पुरानी बात होगी, 200 400 500 600 या फिर 1000 साल पहले नए गॉड्स इंट्रोड्यूस हो जाते थे. बट देन संतोषी माता इज ए न्यू इन्वेंशन, ये लिटरली 40-50 ईयर्स पहले ऐसा हुआ है.
Yeah, that happens. So especially that's the reason why, although it's not 33 million or 330 million gods, it's just 33 from the Vedic pantheon. The reason why it is called that we have 33 crore devas is because every local village has its own deity, which is called Grama Daivat. So if you count the number of villages and the number of local deities that have evolved as a conglomeration of multiple deities, so that's where all these 33 crore gods come from. So it is not literally 33 crore, but it's still a lot of gods, local gods, and conglomerations of gods, evolution of one god into another, avatars of Parvati, like Durga, Vani, and all those things. Yeah, Vani is an avatar of Lakshmi, I guess. Yeah, but basically, these local gods called Grama Daivata, they have created what is so much huge, or plethora of gods that have been created is because of this belief that you can add the gods. So yeah, that's definitely the case, and it's pretty obvious that yeah, Hinduism does have a lot of gods because every person can have his own god, a personal deist god. So yeah, that's definitely surprising and interesting to know, but it's not really that, um, you know, it's very common.
या एंड संतोषी माता की स्टोरी मूवी की वजह से पॉपुलर हुई थी.
Mhm.
एंड बिहार में तो ये बहुत ज़्यादा है संतोषी माता. पीपल व्हेन वी से संतोषी माता, वहाँ पे द मीनिंग इज़ दुर्गा. तो ये
Mhm.
इतना ज़्यादा और ये इतना न्यू इन्वेंशन है. जब मुझे पता चला, आई वाज जस्ट कंप्लीटली ब्लोन आउट कि ये अभी भी ऐसा हो रहा है.
Exactly. Yeah, it keeps on building up.
या एंड आई हैव वन मोर क्वेश्चन. क्या नास्तिका जो ट्रेडिशन थी, आर दे पार्ट ऑफ हिंदुइज्म टुडे? क्योंकि पहले तो चारवाक्स वेदास को क्रिटिसाइज करते थे, उसको रेफ्यूट करते थे, बट आर दे पार्ट ऑफ हिंदुइज्म टुडे?
Um, so today, if you consider the modern Hinduism, so let me tell you the difference when you say are they inclusive or are they exclusive? That's what the real question is. So if you think about, let's compare that to the Abrahamic religions. There are three things which are there in Abrahamic religions. We have apostasy, blasphemy, and heresy. So apostasy is renouncing your religious belief. For example, if you are, let's say, you are a Jew and you're following Judaism, and you renounce your religious beliefs, the beliefs that are written in Torah. So if you renounce them, you are committing what is called apostasy, and that is punishable according to Judaism. And then we have blasphemy, like criticizing God or the words of God. That's blasphemy. That's also punishable. And then we have heresy, like putting ideas which are contradictory to the ideas given in the religious scriptures. So that is called heresy, going against the scriptures and putting forth an idea that contradicts the knowledge from the scriptures. So if you take a look at that, um, you have Giordano Bruno, who was a heretic, and then you have many other people, spiritual philosophers, who were considered heretic by the Abrahamic religions. Giordano Bruno was burned alive for his heresy by the by the church. So these ideas are absent in Indian religions. There is no idea of apostasy or blasphemy or heresy. You can criticize the Vedas, nobody's going to kill you. You can renounce your religious beliefs, nobody's going to kill you. And you can provide an alternative idea which goes against the scriptures, and there is no punishment. Now, the question of inclusive or inclusion, that is a different question. So they were a part of the society. It's just that the Vedic poets or the Vedic priests considered them as ignorant. Like, for example, if you take a case with Charvaka, do you know where the word comes from? Charvaka.
आई थॉट ये महर्षि चार्वक से आता है.
No, no. So it comes from charva, which means to eat. That's all they
ओके.
did. Because they renounced everything else. They believe that there is no God, there is no heaven, there is no hell, and there is no afterlife, and there is nothing called a soul. So basically, they are nihilists, they are materialists. And all they know is survival. And what they say is eating is necessary for survival. So charva, to eat. That's where they come from. Charvaka. So that's why they criticize the Vedas. But they were not, they were not killed or they were not punished for that. They were just considered ignorant, materialist, surface thinkers. That's what they were considered, because there was no rigid structure to the society. If you want to perform a sacrifice, I am happy to avail my services. So that's how it worked. So there's supposed to be one person who invites the Vedic poets to perform the sacrifice for some. Oh, when I say sacrifice, it's not animal sacrifice; it's ritual. They were called as Vedic sacrifices. So there needs to be a person who invites the Vedic poets or the priests. They perform the ritual for him, and then he should get the desired result which he wants. It was it was based on choice. Not just Charvakas, we have Ajivika, and then we have the rise of Buddhism. Buddha and Jaina, Mahavir and Buddha both were considered to be Nastika because they rejected the Vedic principles. They questioned and challenged the ideas of Upanishad. And then Buddha built his own superstructure on it. So Buddhism is challenging the fundamental principle of Upanishads, and that is the principle of Atman. So Buddha rejected that idea. He said that no, there is no Atman. It's Patitya Sammupada, Pratitya Samutpada in Sanskrit. It means dependent origination, cause and effect. And there are 12 links in that chain, which I won't go deeper into right now. But these were called Nastika, and they were very much included. Although you could say that the Brahmins of the Buddhist era, as Buddha, he was the awakened one, and he started spreading his teachings. You will be surprised to know that a majority of his disciples were Vedic Brahmins. They renounced their religion and accepted Buddhism, Buddha's ideas. So they were Brahmins. Because his philosophy was so difficult to understand for the common person and for the layman who does not even understand the Upanishadic philosophy. And Buddha is trying to provide a rebuttal for that. So it's very complex to understand, especially the Paticca Samuppada. It's very difficult to understand for a common man what exactly Buddha is trying to say. So majority of his disciples were Brahmins. And so that's why if you think about it, they were not killed or punished or something like that. They were just considered external to the Astika tradition. So they did not form a part of the Astika tradition, but they were not punished either. The choice of renouncing your religion, of providing criticism, was available, which is not there in the Abrahamic religion. If you go against the word of God, there's a story in Judaism where we have Moses who is bringing the Ten Commandments down from Mount Sinai, and then all the Jew followers they start worshiping the golden calf. That's idolatry. The golden calf or the bull was worshipped in many religions, including Hinduism. We have cows that we worship. So they started worshiping the golden calf. They built the idol and started worshiping it. And so God, Yahweh, which is the God of Judaism, he became angry. He was furious that they are worshiping someone else who is not him. So he's an envious, cruel God. And what he says to Moses is, whoever worships anyone other than me should be stoned to death. That is what their scripture says. That's apostasy, blasphemy, heresy. All are punishable, sometimes by death, sometimes by excommunication, all those things. It is completely absent in the Indian religions. Nobody's going to punish you. That's where the thing comes from, that Hindus are tolerant, because that is what our scripture says. We are inclusive. I mean, we accept the ideas, but we don't consider them as equally worthy of the Vedic ideas. That's what it is. Charvakas' ideas were accepted, but they were considered surface thinkers. Um, like you could say materialists, and Vedas
Hmm.
were ontological. So that's where the distinction is. But in modern Hinduism, definitely there are no Charvakas because people don't know what Charvakas are. There were two types of Charvakas as well, Dhurta Charvaka and Shushiksita. Or the second one, I'm not sure about the second one, but there were definitely Dhurta Charvakas. So there was also an internal dichotomy in what the Charvakas are.
What
So
is the
yeah.
difference between the two?
Oh yeah, so I'll have to check that again to tell you I'm not reversing their roles. But one
Okay.
of them were complete materialists, while the other said that life had a purpose. It's not completely meaningless or purposeless. It has a purpose, but Vedas, what Vedas say is not that purpose. Vedas do not know what the purpose of life is. So that's the difference between the two schools. Other school says that there is no purpose to life. I mean, life is meaningless. That is what the other school of Charvaka says, which is in a way true.
Yeah, it
I
is
mean,
true.
yeah, modern science does reveal to us that life on Earth is just a series of accidents, which is evolution of planets and evolution of biological life is merely a series of accidents. So it does not have an objective purpose or a meaning. So the Charvakas were closer to the truth, but that was coming out of their, you could say, criticism of the Vedas.
Hmm.
They did not know that evolution of life happens or natural selection happens. They didn't know that.
या एंड उनके भी कुछ वियर्ड व्यू थे बैंक से लोन लो घी पियो एंड देन लोन लियो ये भी भूल जाओ लोन मत चुकाओ.
Yeah, exactly. That's true.
बट हिंदुइज्म के बहुत सारे सेक्ट जैसे कि ब्रह्मो समाज या फिर आर्य समाज ये सब बहुत ज़्यादा रिएक्शनरी हैं. जो भी चैलेंज उस टाइम में पोज किया जा रहा है उस पर रिएक्शन दे रहे हैं. सो वाई इज़ दैट?
So yeah, so I'll tell you something. When Buddhism gained prominence, so that Buddha was around 500 to 600 BC. After that, most of the kingdoms in India started becoming Buddhist, especially with the rise of Ashoka's reign. He started spreading the idea of Buddhism far and wide. So people started accepting Buddhism, and this was a threat, an intellectual threat to Vedic Hinduism. People were renouncing Vedic Hinduism and accepting Buddhism, and maybe Jainism in some cases. But Buddhism was a huge rival, intellectual rival to Vedic Hinduism. So that is why, when the Dharma Shastras evolved, especially in the Manusmriti, Dharma Sutras, and Dharma Shastras, we see in the Smritis that the people who abandon household life, grihasthashrama, people who abandon that and become monks, they were called as pravarjitas. So pravarjita is actually for Buddhist monks and priests, not priests, Buddhist monks and ascetics who have renounced the household way of life, which is recommended in the Vedic religion, it is recommended in the Upanishadic religion. So Dharma Shastras clearly criticize Buddhism. And then in the Buddhism, we have clear criticism of Vedic Hinduism. So we see there was always a conflict, a philosophical conflict between the two. And later, Buddhism itself evolves into multiple schools. So right now we have the three major separation. We could say separation of Buddhism. It's Theravada, and then we have Mahayana Buddhism, and then we have Vajrayana Buddhism. Theravada is also called Hinayana Buddhism, but that's a derogatory title given by Mahayana to Theravada people.
ओके.
Yeah,
ओके.
so Hinayana just means smaller vehicle, and Mahayana means a larger vehicle. But
ओके.
we'll get to
ओके.
the difference later. Yeah, but that's how Buddhism evolved. And all the texts of these try to oppose the ideas from the Upanishads, and it is basically a rebuttal. So these were philosophical conflicts. But Dharma Shastras, in the Dharma Shastras, we do see that they are criticizing the Pravarjatas, and they call them to be lowly, as similar to the low castes. So that is what they're calling them. But
Okay.
this is purely a criticism of that idea so that people would return back to Vedic Hinduism. And the
Hmm.
reason why Bhagavad Gita, and this is very important for people to understand, definitely Bhagavad Gita comes after Buddhism. Buddhism is 500 to 600 BC.
Hmm.
After that, we see linguistically, Mahabharata is written. The thing is, it is not about the story, it is about the ethos. So, Bhagavad Gita is the ethos of Mahabharata. The story is built around Bhagavad Gita so that this message could be delivered to the common people. And so that is why it is represented in the form of a story, a huge story of whose the moral or the denouement is the Bhagavad Gita. So the real purpose of writing Mahabharata was to get this message of Gita delivered to the people. And if you take a look at the message of Bhagavad Gita, Gita does not say anything new that is already not present in the Upanishads. Some of the verses are literally
Yeah.
plagiarized versions. So you see that what is happening here is to bring people back to this Upanishadic wisdom. That is why Bhagavad Gita was written, so that people would realize how great the Upanishadic ideas were. So to bring them back from Buddhism into Vedic Hinduism, that's why Bhagavad Gita was written for the masses, so that people would know what the Upanishadic ideas are. In the era of Upanishads, it was only known to the elitists, and there was no discrimination. It's just that only elitists discussed these ideas. A common farmer was not interested in Brahman or Atman either way. So these were
Hmm.
elitist ideas. But in later texts like Bhagavad Gita, this knowledge was made available to the masses. And so all the later Vedantic schools consider Bhagavad Gita to be fundamental. Like we have Ramanujacharya, Shankara, Gaudabada, all these people who came later. So that's very interesting. And that is how we see the difference. That, okay, Bhagavad Gita is written because of that. And that is why Bhagavad Gita follows a very similar pattern to the Upanishadic pattern. There's a person who talks about Brahmana, and there's a person who is the listener. So Arjuna is the student, Krishna is the teacher. The only difference is in
Yeah.
the Upanishad, it is in third person. One person is telling another person about what Brahmana is. So that's a third person conversation. We have Yajnavalkya, we have Uddalaka Aruni, Uddalaka Gautama. In Bhagavad Gita, the foundational, the fundamental statement of Tattvam Asi of Upanishad is converted into Aham Brahmasmi. Because now Krishna is a personification of the concept of Brahman. If you just say, especially when you said that this is very difficult to understand when I talked about Brahmana, that is exactly the reason why they brought the
Hmm.
character of Krishna. Because for common layman who is not familiar with these ideas, he's oblivious to it, it's very difficult for him to process that, okay, Brahman is related to the universe, but it is still external to it. How does that function? But
Hmm.
then when you bring Krishna as a personification of this concept, that okay, this is how Brahmana is. That is when you realize why the Gita was written and why Krishna is the central character. He's a character. It's irrelevant if Krishna even existed or not. That was not the purpose of Mahabharata. The purpose was to get this message delivered to the masses. That is the reason why Gita was written, and it's clearly to bring people back from Buddhism to Hinduism. So that's why this evolution happens.
एंड रामायण के लिए भी ये बिल्कुल सेम है क्या?
Yeah, so we see in Ramayana, so Ramayana is more like a Mahakavya. So it's basically kavya, poetry.
ओके.
And it's a poetry of one person who can show, his actions can show what dharma is. So earlier when I mentioned you don't have one single definition of dharma. The only way you can define dharma is not this, is not this, is not this, is not this. But when you take a look at the character of Rama and the actions of Ramachandra, you know that okay, if I follow these actions, I'm following dharma. So it is like a template to follow dharma. That is what Ramayana is. It is the story of Rama, it is the journey of Rama. And you will be surprised to know that Ramayana has more than, or maybe not more than, almost 300 recensions. 300. So there's a book written by A.K. Ramanujan. I'm not sure if you have read that book. The Collected Essays of A.K. Ramanujan. And it's
A.K.
published by
Ramanujan.
A.K. Ramanujan, yeah, published by Oxford University Press. The title is The Collected Essays of A.K. Ramanujan. So that's the book. And if you read that book, you see that there's an entire chapter on Ramayana and Mahabharata. And these are the recensions. For example, if you might not be knowing that in Jaina Ramayana, do you know that Lakshmana kills
Yeah,
Ravana,
I
not
know
Ram?
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because the thing that they want their followers to know is that Rama is considered to be similar to Tirthankar. He is considered to be a divine. He's considered to be divine. So he cannot commit hinsa, he cannot commit violence. So that's why Lakshmana kills Ravana. And there's always Vasudev and Prati Vasudev and Baladev, the concept of Vasudev, Prati Vasudev, and Baladev in Jainism. So that concept is repeated. And they have adopted the story of Ramayana to expand their principles, to fit Ramayana into the template of Jainism. Buddhist Ramayana is also different. So you see, all these stories, they are recensions of Ramayana. And even in the southern India, if you take a look at it, there's a change in the southern recensions and the northern recensions of Ramayana. Because the story itself was meant to, promulgate the ideas of what a person should act like. So that's why they were never fixed. It is not, I don't know why people call it history, because internally it calls it itihas. The text internally calls itself itihas. But it's a Mahakavya. That's what Mahabharata and Ramayana are, Mahakavya. And they can be
Mm.
changed. You can definitely change them. In fact, that's the beauty of it. If you take a look at it, if there are 300 recensions, that shows the diversity of Indian thought. And still, they are trying to attribute that to the single person, Rama. But he has so many attributes now. He's filled with color. So that's the beauty of it. And that's how people should take it instead of taking it literally as the history. It has never been history. History is the people who wrote these things. They are real. The composers, the authors of the Upanishads, they are the real people. That's real history. What's written by them is not history. The people who were existing, they were history.
And इतिहास is not history. दोनों का translation में सभी को
Yeah,
समझ में नहीं आता.
exactly.
There's a difference.
Itihas is first person narrative,
Hmm.
which means Vyasa is observing and then writing, so it's itihas. But who said that what Vyasa is saying is like the gospel of truth? He just wants to say that because he wants his text to be accepted.
Well, we are already at 1 hour and 3 minutes.
Oh,
तो मैं अब
okay.
लास्ट क्वेश्चन पूछूंगा. इन धार्मिक रिलीजन्स के बारे में लोग कैसे पढ़े? कैन यू रिकमेंड सम बुक या फिर कुछ पेपर्स?
Oh, yeah. So when I say this, people, so there's a very good book called The History of Dharma Shastras, and it's by Panduranga Vaman Kane, and it was published by Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute. It's a 6,500 pages volume. It's
Oh my God.
6,500 pages. Yeah. It's the history of Dharma Shastras. And just for the people who don't know about B.V. Kane, he was awarded the Bharat Ratna. He was an Indologist. So it's a very legit, authentic book to know about Dharma Shastras. And the reason why I recommend this first is because the second book that I'm going to recommend, many of the people will start talking against it because it comes from Oxford University Press. So there's
Okay.
a kind of weird idea that, okay, this is written by West, so it's incorrect. That's not how it goes. And the person who wrote it, I mean, Dharma Shastras by Patrick Olivelle. And Patrick Olivelle is a renowned Sanskrit scholar. He has studied Sanskrit for his almost entire life. And I think I don't know, is he dead? Is Patrick Olivelle still alive? I don't know. Yeah, but he has done astounding work. So if you want to read the texts, you can read the translations or the books written by Patrick Olivelle. They are extremely authentic and they are based on P.V. Kane's History of Dharma Shastra. He considers that as the primary source, and then he has written his text. So the History of Dharma Shastras by Garne and the books by Patrick Olivelle. That's also early Upanishads written by Patrick Olivelle. So you can take a look at that.
Okay.
And to read
And
Rigved, you can read two translations, and I would highly recommend that read a translation by juxtaposing it with a Sanskrit verse. So keep the Sanskrit Rigveda on one side and the translation on the other side, and then you can check it morpheme by morpheme if there is any propaganda, which there is not. I don't know why people say that Western people have a propaganda. They try to manipulate the texts from their translations. That's not what they do. That's not how academic people function. So for Rigveda, I would recommend the book Rigveda, Earliest Religious Poetry of India, translated by Brereton and Jameson, Oxford University Press. This is the first translation of Rigveda that you might refer. The second one is by Talageri, Shrikant Talageri.
okay.
That's another translation. So for now, you can read these books, but I will definitely recommend History of Dharma Shastras to people who want to know what Dharma Shastras are. And Ved Upanishad can be read anytime later.
या
But these are the
एंड आपने
foundations.
या एंड आपने पैट्रिक ऑलिवर की कोई दूसरी बुक की बोली थी, उसका नाम क्या है?
Early Upanishads.
अर्ली उपनिषद. ओके.
Yeah. And
एंड
he has
या
written many books. So just check Patrick Oliver's website. You will find all his books there.
ओके. एंड महाभारत पढ़ने में सबसे बड़ा प्रॉब्लम ये है कि इट इज़ ह्यूज, ऑलमोस्ट
Yeah.
5000 पेजेस अगर विवेक देवरॉय की ट्रांसलेशन को लेंगे तो उसके लिए मैंने एक दी महाभारत बाय जॉन डी स्मिथ. इज इट गुड?
Is it by the University of Princeton?
आई हैव नो आइडिया. यहाँ पे बस पेंगुइन क्लासिक लिखा हुआ है.
Okay, yeah. So what I would recommend is if you really want to know, if you want to study Mahabharata academically, just do the course by Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, Academic Introduction to Mahabharata. It's, I guess, a 19 or 20-day course, but all the people in Bhandarkar are scholars. They are academics. There are Sanskrit scholars, there are Indologists, and they are people whom you should listen to know about these scriptures because they have studied them. So if you really want to study the Mahabharata academically, just do that course. It's way better than reading the text yourself instead of learning it from a teacher.
ओके. सो मैं ये तो कर लूँगा ये कोर्स.
Yeah.
एंड वन मोर थिंग, रामायण को एटलीस्ट आप पढ़ भी सकते हो क्योंकि रफली 1500 पेजेस है, जो कि ईजी है रीड करना. बट महाभारत में ये बहुत बड़ा प्रॉब्लम है, ऑलमोस्ट 5000 पेजेस, जो कि बहुत ज़्यादा हो जाता है. सो ये जो बुक मैंने अभी बोली थी, महाभारत बाय जॉन डी स्मिथ, इज इट गुड? क्या आपने इसके बारे में
Oh
सुना
yeah.
है?
So I just want to know the publisher of the book. Is it
इट
is it
इज़ पेंगुइन क्लासिक.
Yeah, then it should be good because the reason why I say this is all these famous publishers, they have a very strong editing team. So it becomes highly peer reviewed. Only then they publish that work. So that should be good. That's fine.
ओके.
Anything by Oxford University or Cambridge University Press, Princeton University Press, Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute, or Motilal Banarsidass, that's also another publisher in India, which is very good. Gita Press, all these are really good publishers. They peer review the content before publishing it.
ओके. सो दैट्स ग्रेट. सो थैंक यू सो मच. लगभग
Yes.
1 घंटा 10 मिनट देने के लिए. इस एपिसोड के लिए
Okay.
हमने बहुत ज़्यादा ट्राई करा, बहुत बार पोस्टपोन होता गया, बट थैंक यू सो सो मच. इसमें बहुत ज़्यादा इन्फॉर्मेशन जैम पैक थी. सो एवरीवन, अगर आपको ये एपिसोड अच्छा लगा, अगर आपके पास कोई भी दूसरा क्वेश्चन है, जैसे कि डिफरेंस बिटवीन नास्तिका एंड आस्तिका स्कूल्स, इफ़ यू वांट अस टू गो इन डेप्थ इनटू इंडियन फिलॉसफी, प्लीज़ 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 लेट अस नो. एंड अगर आपको बुद्धिज्म एंड जैनिज्म पे भी एक एपिसोड चाहिए, देन प्लीज़ लेट मी नो. मैं इनसे फिर से रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा, एंड देन वी विल डू वन मोर एपिसोड ऑन बुद्धिज्म एंड जैनिज्म. And if you like this episode, then please like this episode and share it with your friends and share it with all the people who are talking about or spreading fake information about Hinduism. क्योंकि Instagram पे ये बहुत ज़्यादा हो रहा है. लोग कहीं से भी कुछ भी उठाते हैं और उसमें 5-6 साइंटिफिक वर्ड ऐड कर देते हैं, ये साइंटिफिक है, वो साइंटिफिक है, एंड देन सो प्लीज़ उन सभी लोगों को भी एडुकेट करो. एंड या दैट्स इट फॉर दिस एपिसोड, और हम मिलेंगे अगले एपिसोड में.